In this video, I'm going to try and give you a new perspective on one of my favorite side quests in Cyberpunk 2077. Dream On, otherwise known as the Peralez quest, sets the mood for this entire experience shortly after you arrive at the behest of Elizabeth Peralez at their penthouse following a break-in. After searching the home, you notice a photo of Jefferson and Elizabeth on their wedding day.
I wanted blue roses, so we ordered a whole truckload.
Blue roses. You sure? Roses in this picture look pretty red to me.
Oh, of course, you're right. They didn't have blue roses, I forgot.
Something is very wrong here. If you think the stuff that happens to Jefferson Peralez and his wife in Cyberpunk 2077 is pure fiction, then I am here to inform you that you are wrong. From closely examining and piecing together what we can from this bizarre quest, I can safely say that many of the strange occurrences we learn about can actually be traced to types of technologies that, granted, are probably mostly highly classified, but some of which is shown, at least conceptually, to us mere civilians, to give us a taste of a terrifying, very near future where your brain could become your greatest enemy.
The brain is the current and future battle space.
That is Dr. James Giordano, a professor of neurology and biochemistry at Georgetown University, and he's served on advisory boards for agencies like DARPA. I'm going to try to use his lecture at West Point to draw some real-world comparisons to some of the bizarre things that are happening to our soon-to-be Night City mayor and his wife. As we discover from our investigation, the Peralez family is being monitored and programmed remotely. In other words,
They're not spying on them, Johnny. They're fucking with their heads.
As Dr. Giordano puts it, when it comes to weaponizing the brain, it mostly comes down to 4 categories: bugs, drugs, toxins, and devices. The devices are probably the most important because they allow you to do stuff like this. The basis for Jefferson and Elizabeth's neural manipulation is based on the brain's inherent plasticity, or ability to adapt and change itself. This is not a sci-fi principle in 2077. Our brains right now, without anything enhancing them technologically, have a great deal of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is a fundamental aspect of memory. Synaptic plasticity, in particular, is the process by which connections between neurons are strengthened or weakened based on experience. There is a data shard inside the hidden room of their penthouse titled Rewiring Synaptic Pathways that outlines the concept of neuroplasticity and also the concept of plasticity manipulation. They ask, is it possible to create permanent neural pathways using coprocessors? Essentially, the brain has the ability to create neural pathways all the time, but our unaugmented brains need repetition to form that long-term potentiation. Repeatedly activating those synapses can strengthen the connection, and hence lead to learning and memory formation. So when this data shard asks about creating permanent neural pathways, that should be a bit of a red flag perhaps, because to my understanding it suggests not just forming neural pathways extremely quickly, but also not allowing it to be unlearned. If you have a permanent neural pathway that made you crave pizza, I am not sure any drug or therapy could rewire your brain to not crave pizza. There is a bit of an Orwellian vibe to this concept. The data shard even warns that it could be used as a destructive tool by governments and corporations. I imagine something like mass brainwashing. They state that this technology is only in its infancy, but I suspect the Peralezes are probably a breakthrough case. In 1953, in our world, the CIA began work on a project known as MK Ultra. This project, which had its roots in the cruel and unusual torture and experimentation by the Nazis during World War II, began in an attempt to learn about the human brain at any cost, in hopes of finding ways to control it. The CIA experimented on prisoners, mental patients, drug addicts. They experimented on university students, soldiers, and people from even the upper echelons of society. Sometimes the patients were willing, sometimes they were coerced. Sometimes they had no idea anything was being done to them at all. In the experiments, they were dosed with drugs like LSD, psilocybin, DMT, and cocaine. The CIA researched hypnosis in conjunction with these psychoactive drugs. This went on for 20 years. In 1974, the director of the CIA ordered all of the files on the MKUltra project to be destroyed. Years later, the most conventional explanation of the purpose of all these experiments was that the government was, just like the Nazis, seeking the elusive truth serum. They wanted to find a way to break a subject's mind in order to extract information. My main point about MKUltra is more about the nature of the experiments themselves. The government targeted individuals and tormented them physically and psychologically, and they were never informed why. It also begs the question, after decades of technological development and brain research, what are the top secret projects working on now? 15 years ago, research began on what was known as a DARPA beetle. The experiment created an electronic interface that was attached to a beetle and connected with the insect's brain. Through precise electrical stimulation, this device allowed the insect to be remote controlled. Research on this has continued, and now we can turn cockroaches as well as other insects into remote-controlled cyborgs. Researchers had hoped that the cockroaches might be able to be used to search for people trapped under rubble during war or disasters. That would be one of the more beneficial uses for such technology. I am sure they could also create a swarm of cyborg insects for more insidious purposes. These strange experiments are some of the applications that I would classify as a type of mind control, and that we're allowed to know about. This research has progressed a great deal in the years since they began work on the cyborg beetles, and they're now working on implanting small devices into human brains.
We can go further. Clearly, one of the things we can also do is transcranial neuromodulation, the idea of going through the skull to modulate the node and network activity of the brain, to optimize the performance of key individuals in certain tasks and performances that are relatively to their missional space. And we can also do that against hostile or perhaps belligerent others. We can go further to implant certain brain-machine interfaces. These are many of the DARPA programs that you may hear of now. Probably the one that is most notorious, in a very good sense, is something called the N3 program, which is the non-invasive neurosurgical neuromodulation program being run by their program manager, Dr. Al Mundy. The idea here is to put minimal-sized electrodes in a network within a brain through only minimal intervention to be able to read and write into the brain function in real time, remotely. The United States is not alone in such efforts.
With such advanced technology, insidious agents, governments, and corporations alike could control huge numbers of people. What would stop them from just brainwashing the entire population using the bugs, drugs, toxins, and devices that Giordano discusses? Why not brainwash soldiers to forget the war crimes they committed? Why not brainwash workers to forget how much they hate their job? What if I brainwashed you to become a better person? Brainwash you to go to the gym, eat healthier, quit smoking, be nicer to your partner, be more productive at work, less aggressive. Perhaps some of you even take a prescription for something that helps you do just the things described. Is that mind control? Is consent the only barrier between what is ethical and what isn't in these matters? I honestly don't know myself. Continuing our investigation, if you are of sufficient technical skill, you can approach the TV in the penthouse and attempt to interface with it.
Broken?
It was fine a couple days ago. We rarely use it, though.
What was that?
No fucking clue. Felt kinda good, but weird, like tripping on acid.
That happened to the screen a lot, or to any of the others?
I don't understand.
What just happened a second ago? Didn't see it?
No? What?
Never mind.
Why does the TV cause you to black out? When Jefferson describes the night he saw an intruder, he said he fired his weapon and then blacked out. I wonder if how we momentarily blacked out from messing with a TV is similar. And it makes me wonder, is the TV transmitting some kind of neuroweapon?
And here, once again, we're talking about the use of either drugs and/or devices to modify the integrity of brain function that we realize can also modify individuals' perception of time and space. We talked earlier about how these may be used in interrogation scenarios, and this too may be used against key individuals to be able to modify their perception of time, their perception of what occurred and what did not, memory modification, etc.
On several occasions, my friends pointed out that I was acting strangely.
Oh, that must have been hard.
It was. You know, it's at times like those you start to question reality.
So the whole time you knew what I could end up finding?
I don't know who, how, or why, but they're changing us. That concealed room in our apartment,
What about it?
I'm sure I'd seen it before, but must have somehow forgotten. I find that terrifying.
Overlapping memories, changing personalities. Remind you of anything?
Later on, after you discover the hidden room, it seems like something is triggered in Elizabeth and she suddenly gets some sort of headache or something. She leaves and smokes a cigarette in the other room.
Wonder how long they've been keeping this from you.
Too long. This ends now. I'm not letting any more of those freaks set foot! Ugh, my head.
Something wrong?
Don't worry about me. Do what you have to do.
The symptoms she describes having throughout this ordeal, memory loss, headaches, and confusion, also makes me think of another real-world case.
Probably the one that you've heard about most recently, most contemporaneously in the literature, is the possibility to use some form of directed energy to affect physiology peripherally and also to affect the physiology and health of the brain. Case in point here, U.S. Embassy personnel in Havana and possibly in China. And of course, there's not a lot that I can tell you about that, although I am one of the researchers on that particular project. But this seems to be wholly indicative and supportive of the fact that this was at least some form of directed energy, whether it was wholly intentional or not, still remains to be definitively decided. However, the pattern of insult and injury to those individuals and the pattern of injury of who was affected strongly suggests that this was an intentional and directed engagement, and that this represents a beta test, a possible probe of a directed energy neuroweapon. And there are a number of countries that had developed initiatives and agenda towards developing just these types of things, the United States included.
In 2017, there were reports that American diplomats stationed in Havana, Cuba, had begun to suffer from symptoms that were consistent with that of a concussion. A year later, an official in China began to also report the same symptoms. The two most plausible causes of these symptoms, from what I have read, is that they might have been exposed to either microwaves or ultrasound. In the 1960s, experiments by Alan Frey found that if you pulse low amounts of microwave radiation at people, they can hear it in the form of clicks and buzzes, and that even deaf people can hear these sounds. As to the listener, it feels like these noises are actually originating inside your own head and not coming from an external source. As for ultrasound, it's kind of weird because ultrasound could be very loud, but it's at a frequency that your ears can't hear. So technically, you could have something as loud as a jet engine next to you, and you wouldn't be able to hear anything, but you would feel the effects of being next to something as loud as a jet engine due to the air pressure. There have been ultrasound weapons deployed as a way to disperse crowds, as it causes such uncomfortable symptoms, but audiologists have warned that this kind of technology can damage people's ears permanently. Perhaps if Donald Trump invokes the Insurrection Act on April 20th of 2025, maybe you'll get a chance to see some of these weapons in action as they're used in the American streets to quash protests. Anyways, this topic can go down a rabbit hole, and I consider myself to be a skeptic, as extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but there are individuals who claim to be victims of these types of attacks that make more radical claims. They call themselves targeted individuals, or TIs. These are people who believe that hostile others are, to put it bluntly, fucking with them, poisoning them, using directed energy weapons against them like the ultrasound and microwaves, and implanting devices inside their brains. They claim to hear voices inside their head and explain it as some kind of advanced form of the directed energy weapons we discussed, though I can't find any evidence that there is a way to implant audible voices in your head using microwaves. These people are dismissed as crazy, and I hate to say it, but their ethos is kind of shit. And unfortunately, this is one of those topics that, if you're researching it, it's quite easy to fall down a strange, bizarre rabbit hole where soon enough you're watching a podcast about Jesus tripping balls, aliens performing sex acts, and nanobots giving you erectile dysfunction. To play devil's advocate, though, we know that MK Ultra happened back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and that innocent people were experimented on, sometimes without their knowledge. We know that this advanced technology of bugs, drugs, toxins, and devices is being developed for the purpose of using it on other people. We don't know how advanced it has gotten because it is safe to assume it is probably highly classified. I mean, there's either two reasons the Pentagon budget always fails its audits, right? Either the money is being pocketed or it's being used for some wild shit they don't want you to know about. Or both. Imagine you're some guy who thinks he's being targeted by these hostile others. Everyone thinks you're crazy. Meanwhile, you think the world has gone and lost its mind and you're the only sane one. This is what happens to Jefferson Peralez if you tell the truth to him about what you found. He kind of loses his mind, except does he really lose his mind? What if you telling him actually snapped him out of his mind-controlled state? Think of it kind of like the red and blue pill scenario, which is hinted at in the quest itself with the red and blue roses. Sometimes the truth is the violent and painful path, while ignorance is bliss. Jefferson Peralez made me really think about the nature of mind-altering drugs, the fragility of the human mind, and the knife's edge of sanity and insanity.
Yeah?
It doesn't matter what you tell him. It doesn't matter what you think of doing or do. You can't change anything.
What?
We know who you are. We know what you are. We know what you want. You are playing with fire. Don't dare cross the line.
Fuck.